What up, gamers? In today's video, I'm painting up my main character from Apex Legends, my personal favorite battle royale shooter. But who is this mystery murderer? Coming in at 42mm tall, 5 grams, hailing from Gridiron, sporting an R301 carbine. She's the Thunder Deployer, the sender of let down range. She'll crack your skull in between her thighs, eat your heart out, G.I. Jane. It's Bangalore!
I came to party.
Let's party indeed. There are 83 different Bangalore skins to draw inspiration from in the video game, but from day dot, I've only ever had my eyes on one. The Enforcer. Those Oakleys are too hot to foxtrot.
No cluster foxtrots in my unit.
This project started at the 3D printer as I had the STL for Bangalore, but I had to quick first add some supports to it, and apparently I added a bit too many to her feet as her foot snapped off when I was trying to remove them.
Taking damage!
Oops. I also tried to 3D print some sunglasses by finding some normal-ish sized ones and scaling them down to fit my model. What I didn't realize is that when I did that, they also got super duper thin, and when I tried to remove the significantly stronger support material, they also broke. Starting off good! No matter, I just busted out some Milliput, a 2-part epoxy putty, and sculpted some shades using a dental tool and a silicone brush. Couple of putty sausages later, and we have something that resembles sunglasses more than it does Geordi LaForge's visor from Star Trek, so we'll call it a win. Once it dried, I also sanded it smooth so it looked less trash. Now, onto the diorama. I want Bangalore to feel like she's in the world of Apex Legends, and whenever I think of the game, I think of the more arid, dry parts of the map, like Skulltown. I grabbed a cute little puck-looking plinth and scratched up the surface to better improve adhesion, and then I superglued on some more Milliput to make the surface a little bit more irregular. I also glued on some smashed up slate rock to get some nice, jagged scale model rocks. I then spread on some PVA glue and showered my little setting with some sifted, dried dirt, actually. It's nice and powdery, so it scales down to my tiny world pretty well. Once that was looking good, I locked it all in with super glue thin. I then airbrushed the ground texture with an orange color and an ochre color from the side to get a bit of blending going on from the front of the diorama to the back. I followed that up with some dry brushing with an off-white color to bring out the texture of all that lovely dirt and rocks. The last step in this part was to apply a GW contrast paint to the rocks to differentiate them from the rest of the surroundings while not spending too much time painting rocks. Alright, on to some fun scratch building. There's a lot of verticality in Apex, which is part of what makes it so much fun. Movement is a huge part of the game. Because of this, I wanted Bangalore to be on top of a platform, so I figured I'd scratch build a fence for that platform. I began in Photoshop and made the general outline of my fence and then cut it out a very thin styrene sheet on my vinyl cutter. That isn't looking right. There we go. For the mesh in between my fence sandwich, I used micro mesh that I found at my local scale model supply store. Normally I use wire mesh for sculpting, but this stuff is way thinner and a finer weave. With that styrene cut out and cleaned up, I wanted to bend the fence to the shape of the plinth, so I taped both pieces to the actual plinth and tossed this delicious Hostess snack into the microwave. This is a technique that I read about online and I'm trying out, but there are likely some adverse side effects of microwaving plastic, like giving off noxious fumes that will probably kill me in 10 years, so proceed with caution if you're following along. I went for 30 seconds on high in a 1000-watt microwave, but make sure to let it sit or else you'll burn your mouth on molten cheese. This method kind of worked, but the styrene I used was so thin that removing the tape from it largely removed the bend, so it ended up not really doing much. Next, I glued the mesh in between my fence pieces with some super glue and sanded the edges a bit. I then grabbed some hollow, cylindrical styrene stock and a rod that fit nicely inside to make the posts of the fence that I would use to attach this to the base eventually. It's nice to have a variety of generic shapes on hand for scratch building. I usually hoard not only styrene, but aluminum, lead, brass, and wood. I then glued on some tiny baby rivets that I found on a train scale model website, and after much trial and tribulation, God damn it! My fence was sufficiently fastened. For the base of my platform, I used some specialty styrene with a diamond plate pattern and cut out a circle smaller than the diameter of my plinth. To raise the platform up, I needed to have some kind of post that's holding it up, so I drilled a hole with my X-Acto knife that matched the size of a piece of styrene rod that I had. With the column plotted out, I could add my fence into the scene, and now is when I did some hand bending with the hairdryer, which is always a little janky, but the final product ended up looking alright. I do want to find a great solution for bending styrene at some point, however. Okay, now we need to flesh out our scene with some greaves, but before we do that, a brief word from our sponsor. Apex Legends is being brought to life with a new board game featuring minis that's live on Kickstarter by Glass Cannon Unplugged. The game includes miniatures of all the original characters from the video game that fans have come to know and love, like Wraith, Bloodhound, Gibraltar, and of course, Bangalore. The game also features terrain pieces and equipment effects that you'll recognize from your matches, such as supply crates, smoke bombs, airdrops, and more. The models themselves are 40mm in height, and the gameplay features skirmish mechanics that uses cards and also a grid for movement. The game interestingly doesn't use dice and instead resolves the combat with a unique mechanic using a shooting track that simulates weapon recoil. The cardboard terrain is foldable, sturdy, and modular. The board game features mechanics that closely mimic the video game, such as a shrinking play zone that increases tension and forces player interaction, loot gathering, customizable weapons, and unique skills for each legend. Glass Cannon Unplugged also has some planned expansions with additional characters, maps, and also game modes such as free-for-all and cooperative against the game. Since the campaign launched, the developers have changed up the pledge tiers to better meet backer expectations by adding more legends and including stretch goals for even more characters. You can also pick up an exclusive Apex Legends disc plate available only in the campaign as well. To sweeten the deal further, every backer on Kickstarter will also receive a free Loba miniature. You can find the campaign linked below. Thanks to Glass Cannon Unplugged for sponsoring this build. Now back to my greebing. Whenever I build up a scene, I always grab more bits and bobs than I need, and naturally I'll use certain elements and not others. I picked some details that made sense from my bit storage for the near future world of Apex. I began by attaching this light-looking thing to the top of our post to hide the fact that it was hollow. I then added this flywheel-looking pewter bit to the middle of the column by pinning it in, and it'll become clearer why I decided to add this later. Oh yeah, I also forgot that I added some stairs for some front support to our platform. It's great to have things like a generic set of stairs or ladders on hand because scratch building these sucks. The last little plastic bit I added was a baby fire hydrant. Why do I have a tiny fire hydrant, you ask? I have no idea, but I'm glad I do. Okay, so what's the deal with the wheel on the post? In Apex Legends, there are a lot of zip lines, and I found these perfect little eyelet bits, so I figured I'd string some rope in between them and the wheel as a nod to that detail of the game. At first, I used lead wire because it bends wonderfully, but I couldn't get it taut enough. This is largely because I'm impatient and didn't wait for the plastic glue to fully set up. I instead used string, which worked great, and I soaked it in super glue thin, which made it nice and rigid, which makes painting later easier. Lastly, I busted out this etched set of wrenches and added one or two to the scene. I've had this little set for a super long time, and I've been dying to use it on something, and this was the perfect chance for it. That was the last step of the actual build, so now let's paint it. The world of Apex is pretty destitute. The characters are basically playing a lethal game for cash, and as such, where they fight is pretty banged up, and I wanted the setting to reflect that. I base coated the whole build a rusty red color and then sponged on some silver paint to hit all the high spots. This leaves a nice rusty red color in the deeper parts of the model, which is where rust would click naturally. Next, I painted on some chipping medium and then covered it all up with a cream color. I wanted my diorama to match an Apex-looking scratch build that I had done in the past, video linked in the description and also in the top right-hand corner of the screen if you want to check it out. With the paint dry, I took a damp brush and began to reactivate that chipping medium under the paint, revealing a rusty, silvery undercoat. I love the effect this chipping medium has. Super convincing. I'll have all the products that I use in this video in the description below if you want to check them out for your own builds, by the way. I also painted various parts of the build with a blue color, again trying to match that building like the stairs or the zipline eyelet pieces, etc. Next is all about building up layers of weathering. With a sepia wash, I applied it selectively to the corners and edges to stain the white a bit. I especially like the way this looks on the blue parts. I then added some of this dirty down rust product that's very popular right now to get a more aggressive rust look in a few spots. To paint the other details, I used a GW contrast paint to tint and wash the fire hydrant and rockets that I added later and also rusted it up with some of our original base coat color. We are now ready to glue it onto the base we painted up earlier. The last bit of weathering I did was to mix some dry pigments with water and to wash it into select parts of the model to get a super dusty feel. The last step was to add some static grass tufts and other various desert-looking flora to complete the look. And now we're ready to paint the star of this whole show. The Enforcer version of Anita Williams is largely blues and blacks, so that's where I started. To get most of my colors, I was just mixing these three paints. I began on the blue with the darkest color and then hid it up from there to show off all the wrinkles and her fatigues. This version of Bangalore also features some futuristic markings in a cold white, so I used that color to paint other parts of the model like her smoke grenades and various pouches to break up all the dark color on the miniature. For the black, I used the same pastel color to mix my highlights, and I sparingly added highlights to the black. Too many and it begins to look a bit too gray. An easy way to do this is just to highlight the very edges of the details. The skin we're using for inspiration also has this tiny yellow SWAT logo on it, so I used that as an excuse to use a yellow spot color on the model for various stripes and markings, taking inspiration from that cool symbol we mentioned earlier. I painted her skin a lovely, rich shade of warm brown and highlighted it up from there. You know, the benefit of sculpting sunglasses on this model is primarily, number one, she looks badass, but also not have to paint the eyeballs of a 32mm figure. I painted sunglasses next, which got a nice shimmery highlight right down the middle to imply a bit of glossiness, and then I painted her short curls with a bit of overbrushing, which is a fancy, largely unnecessary miniature painting term for what is basically dry brushing, but with more paint in the bristles. Boom! That's the mini complete, and now we can add her to the rest of the diorama to complete our build.
Pop the smoke, make 'em broke.
I love video games and I love miniature painting and diorama building, so whenever I get an opportunity to put them together, I always jump at the chance. Combining interests is why I started YouTube in the first place, and it's always an easy way to maximize fun. What do you guys think of my rendition of Apex Legends? Which character would you have painted up for the diorama? Let me know in the comment section below. If you're a fan of video games, I have 2 other videos I'll share at the end of this one for you to check out. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you're a fan of the channel and want to support me, there are a couple ways to do so. Shopping on my web store, linked below, for items like a cool cutting mat for your scratch building needs, or maybe even a miniature like the Duchess and the course that teaches you how to paint her. That is also where you can find my merch. Other ways to support the channel is through Patreon, where I have fun rewards like access to my Discord server, where we talk about all things miniature painting. That'll do it for this video. Subscribe or die! And most importantly, don't forget to paint more minis!